After my husband passed away, the house became something I didn't recognize. Every sound felt too sharp, every silence too deep. The walls still smelled like his perfume. His shoes stayed by the door as if he might walk in any second. I kept telling myself to be strong, but strength became another word for pretending. Pretending I could still breathe without the weight of grief pressing against my chest. Ian started waking up earlier than me. He'd bring tea to my room, quietly place it on the side table, and whisper, "You should eat something today." I'd nod, though I never did. His voice sounded older now, steadier than before. There was something in the way he looked at me, a kind of protectiveness that I hadn't noticed when his father was alive. He was trying to fill a space that wasn't his to fill. I could see it, and yet I didn't stop him. I used to watch him in the mornings when he didn't notice, how he carried himself, the way he folded laundry like his father used to. I'd hear Farah's voice in my head, laughing, saying, "He's just like me." And he was. Sometimes too much. It was comforting at first, then painful. Every gesture mirrored what I'd lost. I started depending on it, maybe more than I should have. One night I found myself sitting alone in the dark living room, staring at Farah's picture. The storm outside made the windows rattle, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I started crying quietly, trying not to wake Ian. But he came anyway, stood there with sleepy eyes, and just sat beside me. He didn't ask what was wrong, he already knew. His hand brushed mine, gentle, hesitant, then still. He said nothing, but in that silence, something shifted. For a moment, I leaned against him, the way I used to lean against his father. I felt warmth, comfort, protection, all the things I'd been starving for. It wasn't wrong, not yet. It was only grief trying to breathe through another person's heartbeat. But when he placed his arm around me, the way Farah used to, something inside me froze. My body wanted comfort, but my heart trembled. I stayed like that anyway. I told myself it was just sadness, just a son trying to hold his mother. After he went back to bed, I sat awake till morning. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. I told myself not to think too much, but I couldn't stop hearing his voice, a soft, steady groan. It wasn't the voice of the boy who used to call me Amy when he scraped his knee. It was the voice of a man who'd lost a father and was trying to protect what was left. And the days that followed, I noticed how easily we had slipped into new roles. He'd remind me to take my medicine, handle the groceries, call the bank. Sometimes I'd forget he was only 21. Sometimes I wanted to forget. It made the loneliness easier to survive. But every time he'd say, "Don't worry, I'll handle it," I'd feel both relief and guilt. He was doing too much, being too much. I tried talking to him less, but then the silence would swallow the house whole. I'd find myself waiting for his footsteps, the sound of his keys, even the creak of his door late at night. It became a strange comfort, like knowing someone was breathing nearby in a world that had forgotten how to point. One evening, he asked, "Do you miss him every day?" I nodded. "Every second." He looked at me quietly and said, "Then I'll stay close, so you don't have to miss everything." It sounded innocent, maybe it was, but it stayed with me. That night, I lay awake, feeling the ache of words that were too kind, too intimate. I found Farah's old sweater the next morning, folded in the drawer. The smell was faint but familiar. I held it to my face and broke down again. Ian heard me and came rushing in. He took the sweater from my hands and held me like he was the one protecting something fragile. His voice cracked when he said, "You can't keep doing this to yourself." "I don't know how to stop," I whispered, "then let me help." I wanted to push him away, but I didn't. My fingers clung to him like I was drowning. For a few seconds, grief blurred every line that used to exist between what's right and what's too much. When I finally let go, the air felt different, like something had been exchanged that shouldn't have been. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the empty side of it where Farah used to sleep. The pillow still carried his shape faintly, but it wasn't him anymore. I turned to the ceiling and whispered, "He's all I have now." The words felt small, but they echoed through the dark room like a warning I didn't yet understand. Days kept blending together after that night. I told myself the closeness was harmless, that I was just trying to hold on to what little family I had left. But grief changes shape when you stop watching it. It starts to borrow faces, voices, gestures. Sometimes it felt like Farah was still in the house, only wearing our son's skin. I stopped going out much. His friends called, but he said he didn't feel like talking. I'd catch him watching me quietly when he thought I wasn't looking, like he was making sure I wouldn't break again. I didn't mind at first, it felt nice to be seen. But soon, his care began to feel heavy, like it carried something unspoken underneath. At tea breakfast, he'd pour my tea exactly the way Farah used to. One morning, I told him, "You're turning into your father." He smiled faintly and said, "I learned from the best." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. I wanted to smile, but my eyes dropped to the table instead. Evenings became quieter. We'd sit side by side watching old family videos, his father's laughter echoing faintly from the screen. I'd see the three of us frozen in time, Farah's arm around me, Ian small and bright-eyed between us. I'd look over at him now, grown, strong, and somehow carrying all the weight I'd lost the strength to bear. Sometimes, when his hand brushed mine as we reached for the remote, I'd feel my pulse stutter. It was only a touch, but grief can twist warmth into something dangerous. Syra came over one afternoon, bringing food and her usual questions. "You're lucky," she said, half joking. "Most sons don't care this much. He's turned into the man of the house already." She laughed, but I couldn't. The words echoed for hours after she left. The man of the house. The phrase sat wrong in my chest. It made something inside me feel guilty, though I hadn't done anything wrong. That night, the rain came again. The sound of it against the roof reminded me of the night Farah died. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts wouldn't stop circling the same emptiness. Around midnight, I heard Ian's door open. He knocked softly before stepping in. "You're awake again," he said. I nodded, unable to find words. He sat beside me. I could feel the heat of his shoulder near mine. He told me I should eat more, that I was losing weight. I wanted to tell him it wasn't food I was missing, it was touch, presence, something living. But I stayed quiet. He reached out, brushing my hair away from my face. My breath caught for a second, not from shock, but from the realization of how starved I'd become for comfort. I leaned in without thinking, resting my head against his shoulder. The silence stretched too long. When I finally pulled away, guilt settled deep in my stomach like a stone. The next morning, I couldn't meet his eyes. Every small gesture now carried an echo of that moment. He didn't seem bothered, but there was a change in him too, something more protective, almost possessive. He started telling me not to go out alone, not to talk to people I didn't need to. I told myself it was care, but a part of me knew it was more than that. Days passed like that, half warmth, half tension. Sometimes he'd linger too long near me, his voice soft, almost tender. I started avoiding being alone with him, but he always found a reason to stay close. I didn't know how to explain what was wrong when nothing had technically happened. The wrongness lived in the quiet between us, in the way our grief had started to breathe in sync. One morning, I caught myself watching him in the kitchen. The way he moved, the curve of his shoulders, it was all Farah's memory stitched into new flesh. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Stop it," though I wasn't sure if I meant him or myself. He turned and smiled at me, the same smile his father once had, and I felt something inside me splinter a little more. He began calling me by softer words. Amy turned into Ma, sometimes just you. I didn't correct him. It was easier to let things blur than to confront what they meant. But every night, when I lay awake, I felt the lines between love and need dissolving like sand in rainwater. One evening, I fell asleep on the couch watching television. When I woke, I felt warmth beside me, his head resting lightly against my shoulder, his hand close to mine. I froze, not wanting to move or breathe. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful. Then shame crept in like a shadow I couldn't escape. I slipped away quietly and went to my room, closing the door before the guilt could follow. In the darkness, I sat on the edge of my bed, trembling with the weight of what hadn't even happened yet. I told myself I was imagining things, that this was only grief confusing my heart. But deep down, I knew something fragile was breaking, something I wouldn't be able to fix if it went any further. Still, I couldn't stop missing his presence the next morning, couldn't stop listening for his voice in every quiet corner of the house. When I looked at him across the breakfast table the next day, I realized he had become both the comfort I craved and the silence that scared me most. The air in the house began to change. It wasn't heavy anymore, just hollow, like something between us had burned quietly and left only smoke. I started avoiding his eyes, timing my steps so we didn't move through the same rooms. I told myself it was for the best, that distance would heal what closeness had damaged. But grief doesn't disappear, it only shifts shape, waiting for silence to make space again. I noticed before long. "You don't talk to me anymore," he said one morning. His tone wasn't angry, just hurt. I didn't answer. I couldn't explain the kind of guilt that had no clear cause. He tried again that night, standing by my door. "Did I do something wrong?" I shook my head. "You've done everything right," I whispered. That was the problem. He stepped closer, confused, searching my face for something I didn't want him to find. "Then why do you keep pulling away?" he asked. I looked at him and saw too much of his father, his posture, his voice, the soft crease in his brow. It felt like staring at a memory that refused to stay dead. My throat tightened. "Because I forgot where the lines were," I said quietly. And it scared me. He didn't understand at first. He sat down beside me, waiting. "You're my mother," he said gently, "and I'm your son. That's all this is." I nodded, but tears came anyway. "It should have stayed that simple," I said. "But I leaned on you too much. I made you carry what wasn't yours to carry." He reached out to hold my hand, but I pulled back, forcing the space between us. "You're not my husband, Ian," I said, voice shaking. "You're my child, and I forgot that for a while." He stared at me, eyes clouded, as if I'd said something cruel. "I was just trying to help you," he murmured. "I know," I said. "You saved me, and I let you. But in doing that, I almost lost the part of you I was meant to protect." The room went still. I could hear the clock ticking, each second cutting into the quiet. He stood finally, pacing, breathing unevenly. "So what now? You just want to pretend none of it happened?" I wanted to say yes, but lies felt pointless now. No, I said. I want to remember it for what it was, a mistake born out of grief, not love. That word, love, hung between us like something fragile and dangerous. He looked away, shoulders tense. I didn't mean to cross anything, he said. I know, I replied. Neither did I. The days that followed were silent, but not angry. Just full of the kind of exhaustion that comes after surviving a storm. I started spending time with Syra again. I told her I was thinking about visiting my sister for a while. She looked relieved, though she didn't ask why. Maybe she didn't need to. Some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood. A week later, I packed a small bag. Ian helped me, folding clothes carefully, avoiding my eyes. When we finished, he asked softly, "Are you coming back?" I smiled faintly. Of course. But not until I remember who I am without all this pain. He nodded, jaw tight, pretending not to see our at the door. I touched his face for a second, the way mothers do when they want to say 100 things and can't. You're a good son, I told him. Don't let what happened between us make you forget that. He nodded, but his eyes were glassy. Take care of yourself, he whispered. Always, I said. Then I turned away before my resolve broke. The bus ride to my sister's house felt endless. I stared out the window at the fields rolling by, trying to convince myself that living wasn't running, it was healing. Somewhere between miles, I began to feel lighter, though the guilt still lingered like a dull ache. Grief had made me weak, but distance, I hoped, would make me honest again. Weeks passed. I started waking up earlier, cooking again, walking outside without waiting for someone to remind me. The loneliness didn't vanish, but it stopped feeling poisonous. I learned that missing someone doesn't mean clinging to what's gone. Sometimes it means letting go so the memory can breathe again. Ian called once every few days. His voice was different, steadier, clearer, almost like he was learning how to be 21 again. I told him I was proud of him, and this time, I meant it without guilt. He said he'd visit soon, and I smiled. Not yet, I said. Give us both a little more time. One evening, I found myself sitting by the window, watching the sun dip behind the trees. I thought of Farah, of the promise he'd once made to love me enough that I'd never forget how to keep living. I had forgotten for a while, but I was learning again. I whispered into the fading light, I lost my husband once. I almost lost my son too. Grief blurred every line, but guilt redrew them. The wind carried the words away, and for the first time in a long while, I let them go with it.